Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and today's episode 19, The Glass Coffin, which I've renamed as The Crystal Prison. The structure will be the same as usual, starting off with the summary. Now, in the summary, you have some highlighted points, and there'll also be a little reflection at the end of each paragraph, which I've inserted. Then I'll continue with my critical review on how this particular fairy tale plays out in society today, and then talk about the trigger points. What parts of this fairy tale triggered me and how it affected me? And eventually, we'll talk about more general triggers and how they will affect other people. But I thought I'd start off this way. And this is not by Hans Christian Andersen. This is by the Brother Grimes. Okay, let's begin. The Crystal Prison, which is called The Glass Coffin. The Glass Coffin is a fairy tale by the Brother Grimm's that tells the story of a poor tailor who gets lost in a forest while traveling. He spends the night in a tree to avoid wild beasts, and upon waking, sees a light in the distance. I digress. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel or a situation to give us a sign we're heading in the right direction. Following the light, he finds a small hut inhabited by a grumpy old man wearing a coat made of coloured patches. I digress again. There's always an old curmudgeon to upset the apple cart. The old man eventually allows the tailor to stay the night, providing food and bed. I digress. He may be old, but he's no man's fool. This reminds me very much of the late John McCain in some ways. Reflection. The Glass Coffin is a rich, multi-layered fairy tale that explores themes such as triumph of evil. We need a lot of that. I digress. It's good to see that there's victory over every evil. The power of love and the destiny, the importance of inequalities, and the transformative powers of persistence and the consequences of greed and pride. This is all very good. I digress. The transformative power of love and persistence is undeniable. Real love versus fake love is important. Fake love is from a player. Real love is from a genuine person that has a soul. Next part. The next morning, the tailor is awakened by the sound of a fierce battle between a black bull and a beautiful stag. Imagine that. I digress. This is an impossible comparison between a bull and a stag. The stag, though, eventually defeats the bull and carries the tailor away on its horns. It's a fairy tale after all. I digress. This reminds me of the challenge between David and Goliath. The stag stops in front of a rock wall and releases the tailor, who hears a voice urging him to enter a hidden hall inside the rock. I digress. This stag was on a mission and is insightful. Once inside, he discovers a room filled with glass vases and two large glass chests. One old chest contains a miniature castle, while the other holds a beautiful sleeping maiden. This sounds very much like the Sleeping Beauty. Reflection. The importance of inequalities. The tailor, though poor and humble, possesses qualities such as courage, compassion, and determination, which led him to success and happiness. I digress. True love is imbued with wonderful qualities that cannot be ignored. This is true. The story suggests that one's character and inner qualities are more important than material possessions or social status. I digress. These sentiments, even though they were true in the past, but they're only true in part today. Money, classism, and greed are on steroids in today's society. Sad but true, people. Sad but true. Reflection. No, part three, I should say. The maiden awakens and tells the tailor her story. I digress. This must have been a relief to realize she could at least superficially trust someone. She is the daughter of a wealthy count who lived with her brother in a castle. One day, a stranger arrived who used magic to charm her and her brother. I digress. The magician represents the greed, pride, manipulation, which is all too prevalent in today's society. When she refused the stranger's proposal, he turned her brother into a stag, shrunk the castle, and trapped her inside a glass coffin just because he couldn't get his way. I digress. This is vintage blackmail and manipulation. Pride is the last aspect of ourselves to fall before destruction. The maiden reveals that the tailor is her destined husband, and together they restore the castle and its inhabitants. I digress. This is a typical theme in fairy tales where the man rescues the trapped princess and she surrenders her heart to her hero. In the end, the maiden's brother returns to his human form after killing the magician, and the maiden marries the tailor, fulfilling her promise. I digress. Virtue meets virtue. What a lovely short story. Let's move on to the last reflection here. The transformative power of persistence. The tailor's determination to help the maiden, despite the odds against him, ultimately leads to the restoration of the kingdom and the defeat of the evil magician. I digress. This reminds me a little bit of the Winston Churchill's poem, where he says, never, ever, never, ever, not ever give up anything for nothing. Recited at a small church outside London during World War II. This demonstrates how this theme underscores the importance of perseverance and the potential for positive change when, even in seemingly hopeless situations. I completely agree with these sentiments. But the idea to not ever, 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 never give up, it seems pretty strong, sometimes impossible, but people do it. Now let's move on to my critical review. This is a type of feel-good fairy tale filled with virtues and promises that make you want to believe all is not lost when you compare it to what we're dealing with at the moment in today's society that's filled with pressures to live up to being the perfect man or woman. Imagine having a man or a woman fulfilling their to promises to be persistent, that barely knows you, but goes the extra mile to help you. It seems like a fluke these days, but it's not. It does actually happen. So even though the dating terrain is very difficult at the moment, well, at least for me, there are glimmers of hope that there are good people out there, good men and women that will not let us down. Now we're going to take a look at maybe some 3 situations. The first one I'm going to take a look at is using the sentence from the summary, and it says, I digress. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel or a situation to give us a sign we're heading in the right direction. This reminds me of the pivotal moment in the film Rocket Man, when Elton John, confronted by his friend and joint song co-writer Bernie Taupin, when he confronted him about his downhill struggle with drugs. He says, when you gave up, when did you decide to give up on yourself? He then says, if you don't care about yourself, how would you expect anyone else to care about you when you don't even care about yourself? This is so true, people. A lot of us want people to care about us. But when we don't even care about ourselves, it's very hard for somebody to be convinced or to convince themselves that you're worth caring for. This is the red flag moment for me. And at that moment, Elton swallows a large chunk of dessert, and you see that light goes off in his stubborn head. And that's the moment when Elton decides to go into rehab. He knows he's about lost himself until he has that light at the end of the tunnel moment when Bernie wakes him up from his rubbish way of thinking. Elton John, determined to sing Goodbye English Rose, and his reflection about Princess Diana being loved by people. Elton has amplified tenacity and determination all his life. The film Rocket Man illustrates this through the narrative, how one has the willpower. Some people could or would say it's easy, but it's not. However, it's important to recognize that all the pain of feeling unloved and using music that gave him an enormous drive to overcome his difficulties within himself, family, and professionally. Even though his journey took him down some very dark roads, he managed to find his light at the end of the tunnel. When Princess Diana died, he wrote Goodbye English Rose, which was the follow-up to Candle in the Wind. On the morning of the performance, he was completely drunk on martinis, but Elton willed himself to get on stage as though he was sober. The need to hide his immense pain over her loss was unbearable, hence the numbing of his feelings as they were so very, very close. This man had the audacity to down I think it was between 5 to 15 martinis. I mean, he was just absolutely paralytic, and he was determined. He finished writing the song the day before Princess Diana's funeral, and he was determined to get on that stage and sing as though he hadn't tasted one lick of alcohol, and yet he was absolutely paralytic. I mean, that's sort of stubborn tenacity, perseverance, and persistence in spite of everything. That I don't think we see enough of in society today. But thank goodness that Elton John is a recovering alcoholic, has been off drugs and alcohol for over 25 years, and is doing really, really well. Let's continue with the next one. The stag defeats the bull and carries the tailor away on his horns. I digress. This reminds me of the challenge between David and Goliath, the famous story in the Bible. Even if you don't know the Bible inside and out, which nobody does really, to be quite honest, unless you're a theologian, this is a very famous story that most people know. The stag had a mission and will sow. He never, he would never allow the bull to beat him. Yes, he had a mission and a will, so he would never allow the bull to beat him, even though, in comparison, the bull is a far superior, stronger animal. So I use J.K. Rowling's. So J.K. Rowling's is one of these incredible people, like her superhero, Harry Potter, who was an underdog, somebody that nobody really believed that much in, and thought that the bigger person, the gorilla, the bull, or somebody that was much better, looked much better and stronger on the outside, would win. So they were always the underdogs. And I found this about J.K. Rowling's. She lost her mother to multiple sclerosis when she was very young, went from marriage to a miscarriage to rumors of domestic abuse, finally to signing the divorce and becoming a single mother. By the way, J.K. Rowling's was an English teacher. I think she was in Portugal at one stage, teaching English uh, as well as business English to in-company students. She was jobless and diagnosed with depression and contemplating suicide. Bless her. She was still rejected by 12 publishers, and it took a year for someone to agree to publish the first Harry Potter book. When you think of Harry Potter's character and journey through life, he has been confronted with towering situations and branded the underdog, just like J.K. Rowling's, only to be deemed as magical and incredible. The victory in overcoming the underdog status is having skill and the will to succeed against the odds. There we go again, people, with the same mentality, the same mindset, perseverance, persistence, doggedness, determinations, the never give up spirit that Winston Churchill mentioned in his poem. Now, with Harry Potter, it talks about how he had victory over Voldemort. I think this man was a sorcerer or some kind of a master. So during his confrontation with Voldemort, Harry knew that he was the Elder One's true master. He again cast Expelliarmus, ejecting the wand from Voldemort's hand into his own as the killing curse rebounded off the body, fatally striking Voldemort. Now, this reminds me very much of David and Goliath when David decides to get his little rocks out of the brook and runs towards Goliath and tells him that he's going to beat Goliath with the word. And he threw stones at Goliath and knocked him out and destroyed him. He used his own weapons, which is the same thing which Harry Potter did. He used his own weapon. Tom Riddle was a witch mother and a muggle father, making him a half-blood wizard. But as Lord Voldemort, his ideology is centered on the superiority of pure blood wizard and his desire to rid the world of muggle-born wizards and half-bloods like himself. So in the end, it doesn't matter whether Harry Potter was half and half or a full wizard, he still beat him. And he became not the underdog, the master. Now, the third part to my critical review, I digress. This is typical theme in fairy tales when the man rescues the trapped princess and she surrenders her heart to her hero. In the end, the maiden's brother returns to his human form after killing the magician, and the maiden marries the tailor, fulfilling her promise. I digress. Virtue meets virtue. This is typical. And I use Clark Kent and Lois Lane, for example. This reminds me of Lois Lane in the Superman TV series or films where Lois gets trapped in a car and Superman can sense that Lois, the love of his life, is trapped somewhere. He can just sense, he can just feel her, and he goes down and he rescues her. But how he does it, he doesn't rescue her in so much in the way to say, show her, look what I've done. I've rescued you. You're going to love me forever and ever because I'm the one that saved you. I'm the one that loves you. No, what he does, he in one situation I saw he puts everything back to normal as though nothing ever happened. And so when she wakes up, she thinks, oh, I must have just fallen asleep. Or maybe I had a bad dream. She doesn't know that it's Clark Kent that has rescued her. In a lot of cases, and especially in the film, I saw this. I said, what a clever way of doing this. Instead of making it look as though here I am, the man that's rescued you, it's like just organize everything back into place and make it seem as though she's woken up. And she looks around and she says, wow, this is incredible. And let her have the choice of whether she's going to sincerely love Clark Kent or not. In the end, of course, she does love him, but it's not forced upon her by, look what I've done. I've saved your life. You have to love me now. But I thought that was pretty clever. Let's take a look at the trigger points. The bull versus the stag is an impossible situation for a less forceful animal. Could not possibly win. This triggered me a lot. Now, I'll tell you why. Because of injustice. Because of injustice, the stag eventually defeats the bull and carries the tailor away on his horns. I digress. This reminds me of the challenge between David and Goliath. The stag had mission and will, so he would never let the bull beat him. When I was a child, or let's say early teenager, I loved watching Wimbledon, especially the men's final, where one year Jimmy Connors was playing the late Arthur Ashe in the finals, and it was a foregone conclusion that Jimmy Connors was going to win, of course, and it was a predominantly white sport. You very rarely saw a black person playing tennis. Arthur Ashe was one of them. Maybe there was a female tennis player long ago in the 50s or early 60s, but then later on you saw other people coming up. Then eventually you saw Serena and Venus Williams. But it was a predominantly white sport. So it was a foregone conclusion that Jimmy Connors was going to win. There were even racial slurs thrown at Arthur. However, he didn't let that get under his skin. And he was a black man playing in a white man's on a white man's territory. So Jimmy entered the finals as the runaway winner, and also Ash, the clear underdog. The match proceeded with Connors playing a little behind his best and Ash playing a perfect match. And when he went on to win, it was a shock. Everybody was in total shock. I think the whole of Wimbledon just was aghast when they saw, oh my goodness, a black man, Arthur Ashe, had beaten this player, Jimmy Connors. It wasn't supposed to be, but I can imagine Jimmy Connors, and as an incredible player, but Jimmy Connors had a lot of pressure on him, and not just Jimmy Connors. If you are the foregone, if you are considered the favorite to win, people are expecting you to win, and there's no way that you can lose. Whereas if you're the underdog, people have very little expectation of you, if any, and so the pressure is off you, and it makes it much easier for you to focus and defeat the enemy. In this case, I wouldn't say the enemy, but to defeat the opponent. And that's what happened. He took his time. He was very strategic, very clear. The pressure was off of him. The pressure was all on top of Jimmy Connors. And the more points Arthur Ashe won, the more irritated Connors got, which added even more pressure onto him. And he missed some really interesting opportunities. So this was a trigger for me because there have been many times in my life where I have been the underdog, and people just did not expect me to do well in my art A level. I was expected to fail. There was no way that I was going to pass. And so when the mock exam came along, because you always have a preparatory exam, which we call the mock exam, which goes towards maybe 25% of the whole exam. When the mock exam came, I was just like, well, I've got nothing to lose because I probably already lost anyway. And my teacher was very clear that you're not really going to pass this. I mean, if you're lucky, you might get an E, which I ended up getting an E. But what was interesting, I did a still life, and it turned out to be really, 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 really good. I was surprised myself. And he stood behind me towards the end of the mock exam, and he said to me, this piece of work is going to bring you across the finishing line. You will get past the art A level. But there have been many, many situations in my life where I've been considered the underdog. And, for a long time, it used to bother me. Now it doesn't. Now that I'm a bit long in the tooth, a bit old, it doesn't. And I just find myself thinking, well, the pressures of me. People don't have any preconceived ideas of me being great. So I don't have to worry about whether I win or lose. And so I can focus on being the best version of myself, which I do as much as I can every day. Now, the second trigger, the story suggests that one's character and inequalities are more important than material possessions or social status. I digress. These sentiments were true in the past, but they are only true in part today. Money, classism, greed are on steroids in today's society. This is true. But I must say, the experience that I'm going to share with you still acts as a trigger in my life. But I have learned how not to let this hurt, this hurt or hurt me or affect the way I live my life. I have always been used to, I've always been the bullseye for people's insecurities when it comes to people liking me. If, for example, a man liked me, surrounding people or so called acquaintances would discredit my name so they wouldn't approach me, or they wanted to block any kind of manifestation if they knew what I wanted. This is why I always kept my dreams or my ideas to myself. Before I had my own awakening, I walked around claiming the people who projected their insecurities onto me as their own. I started taking on their insecurities and believing that what they projected onto me was really true. They really wanted me to feel like the ugly duckling and unworthy. And because I was surrounded by toxic haters in my family and society, I really believed it in the end. I had no positive incoming feedback entering my life wherever I looked. So I spent a large chunk of my life in self-hatred, depression, and insecurities to boot. However, there was an important turning point that registered in 1995, but I wasn't ready to make a real change until 2019. In 1995, I was working at a lounge in New York as an event planner and a cocktail waitress. I was surrounded by a lot of people who had what you would call then at an alternative lifestyle, which we call today the LGBTQ community. And because I wasn't gay, I was in the performing arts, but I was surrounded by a lot of people that lived their lives, were liberated, emancipated. I had no objection to that, but I was going to live my life too. And being different. Now, let me tell you something about being different. Just because if you're gay or transgender, that doesn't really mean you're different. If you're born different, that means you have characteristics within you as a person from a soul level that makes you stand out from the rest of the people. It has nothing to do with your preference and who you love or the clothes that you wear. That's one of the things that really hit a note with me when it came to Boy George. I saw a program, and it was a British program, and it was talking about all the different kinds of people. And then it came to the different one. And for some strange reason, I was looking at Boy George, and something just hit me like a thunderbolt. And it said, it doesn't matter whether he's gay or straight, whether he wears makeup or doesn't wear makeup. He would still be different. It has nothing to do with the clothes that he wears, and it has nothing to do with who he chooses to have personal relationships with. And when you are different from the inside, and it's on a soul level, it threatens people because they cannot manipulate you in turning you into something that you are not. They can bully you. They can really give you a hard time. And that can affect you. Believe me, that can affect you. But in the end, you will still be you. And let me continue with my situation. So they didn't really like it. They wanted me to either be gay or to be something else. They wanted to be able to control my personality. And they tried all sorts of things. And they said all sorts of things. But I continued my work. It wasn't very pleasant working there, but I worked there for the money until I was able to leave. But before I left, I used to work there on a Thursday and Friday nights, and on Wednesday, no, it was Friday and Saturday nights, and Wednesday nights I would work. They asked me to work gay night. They called it gay night, LGBTQ or whatever. So I said, okay, I'll do it. For the money, I don't mind doing it. So I did it. And I did that. And I also did the catering parties, event planner. And there was a man on a Wednesday night that would always dress up like Diana Ross. And he looked really, really good. He was really good. I don't think he could sing, but he dressed up like Diana Ross. He looked really good. And one day I was in the street coming towards this place, ready for work, and I saw this guy wearing regular clothes. He wasn't wearing a costume. He was just wearing regular clothes. He had his hair slicked back. He was a black man, had his hair slicked back, a black bomber jacket on, leather bomber jacket, white shirt, white khaki pants, and no, khaki pants and some black shoes. And I said hello to him and I continued walking. And then he saw me the following week and he said, did you know that was me in the street? I said, of course I knew it was you in the streets. And I described what you looked like. And he said, he looked at me and he said, you're not the person I thought you were. And that was the end of it. And he realized, I just wasn't the person that he thought I was. I wasn't the person that he was made to believe that I was just because they wanted to manipulate me. And that has been a trigger all my life. I've had to fight to be comfortable in my skin. And every day since I had my awakening, I'm feeling more and more comfortable standing in my skin. The last one is, I digress. There's always an old curmudgeon to upset the apple cart. The old man eventually allows the tailor to stay the night, providing food and bed. I digress. He may be old, but he's no man's fool. This triggered me because it really reminded me of John McCain and how people can be mean when they choose to do something not because it's the right thing. They just want to get under your skin and cause a riot. And that's what John McCain was like sometimes. He was a curmudgeon. He was old curmudgeon, but he was a very fair person, a really truly fair person. And I'm drawn to the time where this woman, during the campaign against Barack Obama for the presidency, turned around. She said, "Oh, John McCain, he's a Muslim. He's a Muslim. I know he's a Muslim." And John McCain took the microphone from her, and he says, "He's not a Muslim. He's a Christian. He's a decent man. We just have a different ideology." And the woman didn't know what to say. This is vintage John McCain when he's not in a bad mood. And the second one was when the Affordable Care Act was up on the chopping block, was up for review again. This was under the presidency of Donald Trump. And everybody was relying on John McCain to kill the bill. And they called him out. They said, John McCain? He says, I'm here. I'm here. And everybody was holding their breath. All the Democrats are holding their breath and said, oh my God, this could be the killer. And he comes up and he says, yes, I'm John McCain. And he stuck his thumb in the air, upright, vertical, and then he turned it down south. And everybody that were some of the Democrats, I think it was Elizabeth Warren, that sort of screamed out with shock and joy because that completely killed the bill. And I remember a couple of hours before, I was thinking, this bill is going to go down because of John McCain. And I was really angry. And then he turned out and he did something like that. I said, good old John McCain. He's no man's fool. He's absolutely no man's fool. And he was getting treated for cancer at the Mayo Clinic. And the Mayo Clinic supported the Affordable Care Act, which he wanted to destroy, but decided at the last minute not to. And it had a lot to do with Joe Biden, who spoke to him. Not so much Obama, because he had his thing about Obama, but Joe Biden spoke to him and got to grips with him. And of course, Joe Biden spoke to him, and Bo, who died of cancer couple of years before, saw John McCain as a second father. So it's very, very interesting. So this is what I hate, and it still triggers me even today. People that will just do something just to, hurt you, not because they think it's the right thing to do, but they just want to hurt you. Anyway, here's the ending of today's episode 19, The Crystal Prison. And I'd like to say, please, if you listen, please support me. Give me a little bit of love. I'd really appreciate it. Give me a like, a thumbs up, leave a comment, or you can subscribe if you're interested. I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, I'm going to close with a typical phrase. Healing is a lifelong gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Look after yourself, take care, and goodbye. Lots of love.